Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the fall of Singapore with my good friend Ivan Lee. Okay, so first off, what is Singapore? It's a tiny country in Southeast Asia bordering Malaysia on the Malayan Peninsula, and used to be a British colony before the invasion of Singapore.
This is a map of Southeast Asia on the 6th of December 1941, or otherwise known as the day before the events of Pearl Harbor. If we zoom in closer to the Malaya Peninsula and Singapore, you can see that Malaya and Singapore are both British protected, and that Thailand is partly occupied by the Japanese, as you can see on this key. Only 2 days after the date depicted on this map, the Royal Air Force fields in Singapore were bombed. This would later prove to be a major move during the invasion of Singapore in February. During this bombing, 61 people died and many more injured. Britain was shocked that Japan even had planes that could reach and bomb Singapore. This bombing was followed by more air raids conducted by Japan throughout December and into January. They had also managed to bomb HMS Prince of Wales, which is a massive modern battleship built by the British. And due to the crew's inadequate training, the anti-aircraft weapons on the Prince of Wales could not be used to their full capacity. There were 327 fatalities as the ship capsized. So, anyways, this is an updated version of the map shown on the 6th of December. Can you notice the difference? Well, Japan had managed to brutally capture the Malaya Peninsula despite the harsh terrain and jungle of the region. This again shocked the British people. The Japanese were ordered to take no prisoners in favor of speed, so instead of prisoners, it was murder. Between the period of 8th of December 1941 and the start of February 1942, many massacres and rapes occurred as a result of savagery of the Japanese. An example includes the Parit Sulong massacre, where over 100 Australians and approximately 40 Indian soldiers were tortured to death. Malaya was eventually taken, and now the eyes of the Japanese were on Singapore. 8th of February 1942 marked the beginning of conflict within Singapore and the downfall of the English proclaimed Gibraltar of the East. Britain had actually way outnumbered the Japanese, as seen in this visual representation. Japan had less than half of the amounts of the soldiers Britain had, and this doesn't even show the countless battleships and technology Britain had over Japan. So, the first few days of the Battle of Singapore went exceedingly well for Japan. The first few days consisted of crossing the Johor Strait and landing on the island, in a brutal battle. Through mistakes relating to the placements of British soldiers on the straits, the Japanese could access the island easily and flank the British soldiers. This resulted in massive casualties for the British side. After the first few days of battle, Japan had a massive grasp of Singapore, as they kept pushing from the north of the island. There was a line set up in Jurong called the Jurong Line. Heavy fighting near this area was common, but the commander withdrew the Indian brigades that were mainly maintaining the line. The area of Kranji had an opening which allowed the Japanese to flank brigades and land on the island without any resistance. Jurong having been captured, the Lieutenant Archibald Wavell organized a recapture. Unfortunately though, the untrained soldiers that were available due to the ignorance of Britain earlier had failed, and Japan had yet again a firm grip on the island. On the 13th of February, the engineers from Japan managed to repair the bridge stretching along the strait and bring tanks in. On the 14th of February, the Alexandria Hospital massacre occurred. Japanese troops barged into the hospital and killed up to 50 soldiers on the first day, some even undergoing surgery. This also included doctors and nurses. The rest of the 200 staff and patients in the hospital were murdered the next day after being forced into a small room with bad ventilation overnight. The fall of Singapore. On the 15th of February, a delegation of 3 people set off to the Japanese headquarters in order to surrender. The British side surrendered and ceasefire was called.
So what happened after this fall of Singapore? Firstly, it was called the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history, and was seen as one of the worst British defeats in World War II. Local reports by Churchill's physician, Lord Moran, wrote how it left a scar on his mind and how he could not get over Singapore. The defeat also worsened British morale and their prestige and empire in the region, also highlighting British arrogance towards Japan, who was seen as a lesser force compared to them. The capture of 130,000 men did not help the Commonwealth forces, with many being put on the Thai-Burma railways in forced labour camps as prisoners of war. The occupation of Singapore was harsh on its citizens, with war crimes such as Suk Ching, a term which means purging through cleansing in Chinese. It was a mass killing that occurred after the fall, purging and massacring undesirables, that were mainly Chinese, in order to get revenge for their anti-Japanese activities in other regions. Similar to what the Germans did in World War II. 70,000 were estimated to be killed, including figures in Malaya. However, the Japanese have refused to accept legal responsibility for the massacre, with the Japanese only reimbursing $50 million in reparations in 1966. No formal apology has been made by the Japanese government since. With the fall of Singapore as a key military base in the southeast, the Japanese were able to easily sweep through the rest of Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, which led to the threat of a whole invasion of Australia itself, with countless battles over key ports like Port Moresby. The invasion of Singapore and the success of it was a warning for the future of Australia's sovereignty. The invasion of it could have changed our lives forever,